Hey,
Mike,
is this grainy? It is kind of
what?
grainy, isn't it?
No, I'm not grainy. You look
I'm
good.
grainy.
You look
Wait,
good.
hold on a second. Tell me if this is even better.
Oh, yeah, that is better. What camera did you switch to?
You know, I've got this really high-end Logitech camera that is the one I started with.
That one
I
looks
don't know why
better.
it's
What's this
not.
one?
This is my FaceTime camera.
Just the one that's just like on your actual computer?
Yeah, I don't like the color
Oh, that
palette. Oh
sucks.
well.
That's way better than the other one.
I know. It's not. I was just on another meeting and I didn't have the same problem. So I don't know. I don't know what it is, Jeff.
I don't know.
It's
Well, stick with this one when we're doing it because this is crisp.
how's my sound?
It sounds great.
Good.
Yeah,
How you doing?
it's good, man. How are you? I've been wanting to talk to you. We got to, if you got like 5 minutes after the podcast, I'd love to talk to you about our last visit.
For you, anything.
Thanks, man.
I'm sorry. I'm just realizing now that you texted me and I didn't follow up with you. I'm
No,
sorry.
I know how busy you are, man. Don't even worry about it. Don't even worry about it. But dude, I am excited about this week's podcast. I am
Oh,
so
yeah.
excited.
You may be excited, but I'm really nervous.
Are you? Just because
Yeah,
this
yeah.
isn't your forte. I mean, you mostly focus in 19th century Spanish, right?
I do, and I spent a lot of time with Rembrandt. But what is a lot of time with Rembrandt? I mean, everybody's got an opinion on Rembrandt. You look him up online, and there's article after article, the greatest artist who ever lived. There's contradicting opinions about materials, methods, and techniques. There are a whole bunch of contemporary artists alive today who have done their own experimentations and recreating his palette and his techniques. And then you go to, I spent a lot of time before this podcast, not only reading about his biography and practices, but going to actual people who restore his work and do chemical tests of his work,
Mm-hmm.
not people who are just guessing what he's using.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I'm trying to cast aspersions on anybody who is recreating palettes.
Right.
People are doing chemical tests to try and figure out, how he's getting the effects that he's getting. And
But what are
it's
these
just a lot of
chemical tests looking
information.
for? Particular pigments?
Not just pigments, but okay, so I'll jump right into one. If you must know,
Yeah, let's just get it over with, man.
you
Let's just
know,
talk about
that
it.
so there's been a lot of discussion about how he achieves the impasto that he does,
Really?
especially during the last half of his career, right? And there's a it's an interesting study that came out um only in 2022 that shows that he was using lead carbonate to thicken his paint, which we call plum plumbonocrete, plumbonocrite in his impasto mix. And
Huh.
what's interesting about that is that people thought it was a false positive, because there is lead. Everybody's got lead, but plumbonocrete, or I don't know if I'm saying that right, or lead carbonate is also another way of saying it, wasn't widely used by artists until the 20th century. But for some reason, he had figured out that if you wanted to turn his his oil into kind of a paste, he could add that to it. And he kind of used, at least during the last 10 or 13 years of his life, he was working with an oil paint that he had made more of a paste than um, the kind of typical oil consistency that we're used to seeing with oil paint.
No kidding.
So it's things like that that you'd think, okay, well, 17th century, the paints he was working with were not a huge mystery. I mean, we know, like, if you go down to his palette, I mean, I'll give you um, I mean, he's using ivory black, natural brown iron oxides, yellow iron oxides, red iron oxides. He was using smalt, which is a kind of like cheap blue. He was using vermilion. He was using a red lake. He was using lead tin yellow. Um, that was pretty much it. He didn't have a huge variety of colors he was using. And then for a long time, people thought that he was using colored varnishes to get some of the effects he was using. And
You mean
tests,
glazing?
yeah, what that's what yeah, a kind of glazing. But tests have again and again shown that he was not using a colored glaze. He was using a
I'm
clear
not
varnish.
surprised.
Yeah, so there are a lot of there's in 19 I mean we really have kind of jumped into it, but that's all right. That's all right. So
I
um
know I didn't get to talk about
I
how
mean
your week was.
one of the one of the reasons we know this is because in the 1960s there was a project called the Rembrandt Project that was co-sponsored by the Dutch government to really determine what was and what wasn't a Rembrandt. They believed that there were as many as 600 Rembrandts, even though there were claims of over 15,000 to 20,000 works being Rembrandts in people's collections.
Mm-hmm.
And they thought, oh, we'll have this done in 10 years. It took them until the mid um, 2010s. And now they've verified 300 Rembrandts. And they've done all kinds of chemical tests. They
300.
think that there may be as many as 600 out there, and some of them there's a pile of about 400 that are disputed. That even the people who are part of that project don't know for sure, and that they go back
That's
and forth.
above and beyond the 300 that
That's
they
right,
know he did.
above and beyond. So there are 300 that everyone agrees are by Rembrandt. So one of the
100%. There's no
so what
doubt.
I yeah. So I mean, one of the reasons why I've jumped into these chemical tests and why there are all these disputes and this information, why it's so overwhelming to even start this conversation,
Mm-hmm.
because Rembrandt has been recognized as a great master since the beginning of the 1800s. And there's been a proliferation of armchair opinions going on for all that time, almost 200 years, with a lot of contradictory opinions. Until the last 40 years, there has not been a rigorous scientific analysis of chemicals and even like brushstroke analysis through AI, all kinds of things that have been going on. And we're now at a point where we can say definitively he did not use colored glazes. He
Hmm.
added this thickener to his paints. He was not doing anything exotic when it came to the pigments he was using. A lot of what made Rembrandt was technique. It was just technique. It was not any exotic chemicals. And so, today I'm hoping that what we'll do is we'll talk a little bit about um and this it's overwhelming because anyone trying to tackle Rembrandt um quickly gets caught into his crazy life story. And there are a lot of opinions that float out there about why he did what he did and how to divide his work into different periods.
Hmm.
I don't think we'll go a little chronologically, but I think that, like you and I always do, we'll pick a few paintings that we're really interested in,
Okay.
right? We'll kind of talk through
Well,
them.
hold that thought. I'm going to give you a minute to sort of like get yourself pumped up because I got to find a way to. Dude, you know what happened this week?
What happened?
Oh my gosh. Hold on. Hold on one second. I'm such an old dude now. Oh,
Oh, we both are.
okay. There it goes. So this week, my wife was nagging me about, you know, how I constantly am making bags, like leather bags and stuff.
Mhm.
Have you noticed
Yeah,
that?
yeah,
So I've probably got
awesome.
20 of them. And there was about 10 of them in my bedroom right next to my nightstand. And they're not small. They were really piling up. it's it's a sad addiction. So
I mean, it could be drugs and prostitution instead of leather
well,
work, right? I
yeah,
mean,
who told you about that? I'm just kidding. So Jen's like, you got to get that crap out of our house. You know, you got a studio, bring it to your studio. So I'm all alone couple mornings ago. And I'm like, I'm going to be a good husband. I'm going to take my bags out of the house. So I've got bags on, like 3 bags on each shoulder, one around my neck, hanging them back to my back, like one on my chest. Like I'm like piled up with heavy leather bags. And I start heading down the stairs. I can't even see my feet. And I think you know where this is going.
No. Oh
Yeah,
no.
so I slipped on a stair, landed square on my rear end. I didn't go flying down the stairs, but I kicked the railing so hard, I think I broke 4 toes.
Oh no. And there's not really
Dude,
anything you can do about toes
no,
other
my
than just
foot
like,
is huge. It looks like a Flintstone foot, and it's black and blue all the way across and all the way to my heel. It's like, it's bad,
are,
dude.
are,
So
we-
I'm
are we
sitting here at this chair, and you're talking, and the whole time I'm like, I gotta figure out something to do with my foot. I'm dying right now.
are we recording this?
Yeah.
Who would have loved an exploded foot?
What? Who?
Rembrandt. Rembrandt would have loved to paint it.
That's why I told the story. I had a feeling.
Yeah, as he got older, there's a dude who did not go out of his way to make himself look younger or older, or I mean younger or more beautiful. He painted every flaw he possibly could have. And so I encourage you, Jeff, after this podcast to
I should paint
go
my
and
foot.
paint that swollen
Oh
disgusting
god.
foot.
I got ugly feet when they're in good shape. This one. It's off the charts ugly.
It takes, I've never been into feet. Some people are. Maybe people would be into that. Maybe you should start
I
a
should
an
I start an
OnlyFans
Instagram
just for
account.
your
Oh yeah,
foot.
there you go. An OnlyFans for my swollen foot. That's good stuff. Anyway, not to get off topic, but I had to rearrange for a second there. But that gives you a minute to get your bearings together there.
So let's start a little bit and talk about the biography of Rembrandt, and let's put him contextually in history too. So Rembrandt lives. He's born in 1606. To give that a comparison to some of the other people that we've been talking about, Velasquez was born in 1598, so there was only an 8-year difference between the two of
hmm.
them. Rubens was maybe 10 or 15 years older. Caravaggio's about his same age. And I mean, this is what the 17th century Baroque period we often
Wait,
call
do you
it.
remember the Caravaggio's birth year?
Let me look it up right now while we're talking.
I never put that together that they were close.
Yeah, he was born in 1610. No, sorry, 1571. He's 30 years older.
Still, that's really close.
Yeah, they're really, really close.
Wow,
Really close.
I didn't even realize that.
So you've got Van Dyke is about his age. Van Dyke and he know each other and are they're working in different spheres, but they're kind of rivals. And there's some funny stories about the two of them. But yeah, I mean Rembrandt, and here's also one of the important things is that he's born in what is often referred to as the Low Countries in Holland, and they've been in a protracted war with the Spanish. And it's a war that's essentially around the difference between Catholicism and Protestantism, and um, and that war has wound down by the time he's born. Let me turn off this phone. And that means that um, he's grown up in a country that's been struggling with religious identity, with war, and they've entered a period of peace. And boy, do the Dutch become prosperous. I mean, Amsterdam, where he starts in Leiden, which isn't very far away, and he ends up in Amsterdam. I mean, everything is bought and sold. The Dutch East India Company is centered there. It is arguably the wealthiest capital in the history of the world to this point. You can get silks from China and Japan. You can get parrots from the Amazon. You can get like any material, any food. It is like a parrot. The people who have money are not necessarily nobility. So as an artist, you go from a system that was built on royal patronage or church patronage to a system that's now middle class wealth of traders and families that are making money through trade. And that's who his client is. His client is a mix of some of the royalty, but it's mostly these very wealthy middle class people, and he becomes one of them. Rembrandt comes from a miller's family, one of 9 children. He marries into a trade family.
Did you say a
Uh,
miller's family?
a
Like,
miller, yeah, like they mill
Like
grain,
grains?
and that was a way to do
Okay.
very well back then, and a very stable source of income. And then they're wealthy enough that they send him to Latin school, which is different than a trade school. If you go to a Latin school, that's kind of the equivalent of going to a prep academy or a private school today.
Hmm.
He doesn't do very well. I think he graduates at the age of 13, and then he goes to the Leiden University, and he's a disaster. He flunks out after 2 or 3 years.
Really?
And there's just literally a note from the master who says that, young master Rembrandt shows no interest in anything but painting, and he has no aptitude for math. He has no aptitude for for language, for anything.
Yeah,
So
I don't
his
believe that. He just wasn't interested. He was probably the
he's
first ADD artist in history. Actually, no, the first one was probably the first artist.
Yeah, he was definitely struggling, and then he
Yeah.
goes to study with. And by the way, his mother is Catholic and his father is Protestant, and his entire life in a place where religious affiliation is a huge part of your identity, he's kind of unaffiliated, which is interesting. I mean, that's interesting in and of itself that he doesn't pick sides. So
But he did a lot of religious work. Was he
yeah,
religious?
but yeah, we don't know. I mean,
Hmm.
there's some questions because, just to give you a broad swath, he marries into this one of his patrons' families. He kind of marries into this family that are traders and furniture makers and antique and art dealers, and his wife's family has a lot of money. Um, in the 8 years that he's married to his wife, they have four children. Three of them die.
Oh,
I know. He has one son, and his wife dies less than I think 2 years after the son's born.
holy crap. That's like Job
And
material right there.
yeah, yeah. And she knows at this point Rembrandt is wealthy in his own right, but he's also terrible with money.
Yeah.
I mean, he's meeting ships that are coming from the Americas or from Japan and China, and he's spending every cent and borrowing money, right? And she has her own money, and she leaves in the will that he doesn't get anything if he marries somebody else
Ooh,
from
ouch.
her family, and that the estate goes to their son. Half of it goes to the son, half of it goes to Rembrandt, and if he marries, it all goes to the son, and he doesn't get any control of it. And he immediately falls in with his son's wet nurse, who he's together with for 6 or 7 years, and that ends terribly. That wet nurse, apparently, he promised to marry her. He's in grief, like he's lost children, lost his wife. That's one interpretation. And arguably, she's of a lower education class. And so it's not good for his social career either to be marrying to her. But in any case, he treats her pretty shabbily and has her committed to a mental institute and pays for her time there. And a lot of people, are critical of him. And then he lives with his and is like he cohabitates with his housemaid after that woman goes, because he can't legally marry anybody without losing his house and everything. And in any case, he does lose everything. He goes bankrupt 13 years before he dies. I think he's in his, let's see, how old is he? 1653. So he's in his late
47.
40s. He's my age, right? I'm 46. He's my age. He has to declare insolvency because of all of his debts. And he goes and he dies 13 years later, and he's buried in a pauper's grave.
So he died at 60?
Yeah. Yeah.
Jeez, dude, that's rough.
63. He was 63 when he died.
Okay.
But I'm getting some of those years wrong.
So
But I mean,
16. Okay. Close
but
enough.
what's crazy is that he creates some of his best and most memorable works during that last and terrible period of his life. He's deeply unfashionable at that point
Well,
in
how did
in
he
the
get rich then?
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about his career, and let's talk about his upbringing. So you've got, and I want to talk about. Can you play? I sent a video
You sent a
along with.
video?
Yeah, I sent a video because I want to show his
Oh, right here.
I want to show his printmaking, but let's not watch the video yet. Let's not watch it. It has no
Well,
sound.
here's the thing is I don't know if I can put the sound.
It has no sound.
Oh, it has no sound. Okay.
Yeah, so don't worry about
All right, no
it.
worries.
I anticipated you. Okay, so there's the one of the images that you've got. Let me see your images at the bottom of your screen. I want like the most rudimentary, ugly, terrible image that we've got of his. This is one of the earliest works that Rembrandt ever did. He was about 18 years old, and he was studying with a an artist that was named Lastman. Lastman was interesting because he was one of a handful of people at the time who had done a grand tour to Italy. Now, if you were an artist working in the 17th century, if you were a European artist of any kind, the great art that's happening that is determining the trends is coming largely out of Italy. It's coming out of um, Florence is kind of the older stuff, the Raphael, Da Vinci, Michelangelo. The newer stuff is coming out of Venice, and Titian is what everybody's obsessed with. And we've talked about Titian before.
Mm-hmm.
Titian is very painterly, very loose. He's imaginative, but he's also really interested in texture and multi-figural, large-scale storytelling, and very colorful because Venice has a huge amount of access to pigments that are coming from all over the world. And Lastman, who Rembrandt studies with for 3 years, is drilling into everybody's head. You need to be like an Italian painter, and you need to do these very colorful, multi-figural scenes. And let's work in small scale because we're selling to the middle class. We're not selling for big buildings. We're selling to homes.
Mm-hmm.
So this is his first years of art, and it's very rudimentary. He's only what, like 18 years old at this time. I mean, we're not expecting him to be a great master at this
Although a
point.
lot of the people we've talked about were pretty smoking in their teens.
Yeah, yeah. He's and he works with Lastman. I don't know if this was done beginning or end of Lastman's period.
Hmm.
Um, uh, but this is the earliest that we know of after the Rembrandt um, catalog has been produced. Now I want you to skip to a painting that is the Stoning of Saint Stephen. It's just a few down from that. This is done 1 year later,
Jeez.
and this is him on his own. And this is considered by many to be the first Rembrandt masterpiece. This piece
It
is
has a
large,
very Rubens quality to it.
and that is for a reason, and that's because Rubens is dominating. I mean, in the post-war period of the Netherlands,
Mm-hmm.
all the churches are that have been um, emptied during the war period by the Protestants. Um, you're not all of them, but some of them have been retaken by the Catholics as part of the agreements that they've made to settle the war. And Rubens and his team are now fitting all of these churches in Amsterdam where he's gone to work with Rubens has like 300 assistants, and
Mm-hmm.
they're doing everything from tapestries to paintings to carvings to everything, right? It looks very Rubens, and it's the palette. And look at all these gestures, but look at the lessons he's learning. It's very interesting when I think about how this doesn't look like what we think of as being a Rembrandt painting
Mm-mm.
in some
Well,
ways,
the
but in other
faces sort of
ways,
feel Rembrandt-like, but
do they? What to you does? I'm not disagreeing. I just want to know. Just say more about that.
I'd like to introduce you to one of this podcast's valued sponsors, ARTEFEX. Wrong side. Artifa- ARTEFEX. ARTEFEX. They are amazing. Let me tell you about them. Well, first of all, let me tell you what you shouldn't be doing. So, do you guys remember in art school when your teacher told you to just go buy some masonite from the local big box home improvement store, paint it up with some acrylic paint and paint on it? That might have been okay for art school, but at some point you're going to paint a good painting if you haven't already. And I know there are professionals still doing this. So listen to what I'm saying to you. stop. Stop. Have some self-respect. This stuff, this masonite stuff, is not going to last. Not long. Not long enough. If you got a masterpiece on this thing, what a freaking shame. And even if you stretch canvas on it, look at this. Okay, look at this. I know what you're thinking. Yeah, but that's Jeff. He's huge. But I didn't even work out today. And that was nothing. Nothing. So don't do it. Don't paint on that masonite stuff. And then you're thinking, well, I'll upgrade. I'll go to the art supply store and I'll buy some of this stuff, some of this cardboard wrapped in canvas. Are you serious? Seriously, you're going to paint on cardboard wrapped in canvas? Yeah, that's going to last. Okay, ARTEFEX is the way to go. This stuff is unbelievable. It is plastic sandwiched between 2 layers of aluminum, and then it has this incredible linen surface glued to the front with this, I guess it's like some kind of glue that is some sort of industry secret for ARTEFEX. Anyway, pretty amazing stuff. A lot of artists I know are using this stuff. It's high quality. It'll last you a lifetime. It'll last many lifetimes. So for your next painting, take yourself a little more seriously. Go to artefex.biz and get yourself some serious substrates to paint on. That's ARTEFEX.biz. Rembrandt often has this caricaturesque sort of quality to his faces.
Oh yeah, like he's almost so there's this word that's very helpful in Dutch that's tronie.
Mm-hmm.
And it basically means a character face.
Yeah, they're not
And
idealized. They almost feel like
yeah.
I can't think of another word. I was going to say cartoony, but that's not the right word. But see
mean,
how
it's
they
all-
all sort of have these bulbous noses?
Yeah.
You know, it's just, that seems sort of characteristic of his work. Not that they all have bulbous noses, but I don't know how else to describe it.
You know, Rembrandt had in English, I feel like we do ourselves disservice in English because we call things landscapes when really, like, in some languages there are, especially in I think Dutch and French, there are seascapes, mountainscapes, forest interiors, which are called boscages. There's like a whole group of, you don't just call anything landscape, right?
Mm-hmm.
One artist may specialize in seascapes, another in mountainscapes, another one in forest interiors. The same thing is true of portraits. So in Holland, there's something that's like royal portraiture, where you're idealizing and showing power, and they're like marriage portraits where you're portraying the king or the queen's children in the most idealized way so that they can be passed around to potential suitors.
Mm-hmm.
There are other royal families. There's family portraits, or like wealthy portraits that hang in your house to show you've arrived, that are not idealized necessarily like in the same way that a king or a powerful portrait would be done, but to kind of show like the family, what we'd call like a mall portrait when we were growing up, right? You go and like dress up as a family and get a portrait of your family that would show you yourselves off and where you were at that time in life. And then there's tronies, and tronies were interesting faces. So there's a lot of stories of Rembrandt had a huge costume closet. And if he saw somebody walking down Broad Street in Amsterdam where he lived, he'd pull them off the street and he would dress them up in his costumes just because they had an interesting face.
Hmm.
And he'd say, oh, this person is going to be Saint Cecilia, or this person's going to be, the old woman in such and in Jupiter's story of Andromeda, or this kind of thing. And it was just because the face was interesting. So you're right. He would pull out, there's a reason why we think of him as being a great portraitist, and that's because in Holland there was actually a market to buy portraits of interesting faces of people you didn't know, just because the faces were interesting.
This is a self-portrait right here, right?
Yeah, and it's one that was done when he was young too.
Okay, well, let me
get
run something by you here real quick.
Yeah.
Am I crazy, or is he using his face for all of these characters?
Oh, I'm sure that he did a lot of that.
Because that's what might be the style, so to speak, of his faces, is that he's using his own face often as reference.
we know that he sets up studio after being, as a young man, or like 19 is when he does the St. Stephen's. This may be one of his very first pieces.
Mm-hmm.
He's sharing a studio with a man named Jan Liviens, who's one of the great phenoms of the age. We've largely forgotten him, who's also a student with Lastman. So they share a studio together. And there's this great story of I've got the quote somewhere where but I'll paraphrase it, where this man who's one of the great patrons of Dutch art at the time goes to visit the studio of these two young artists who are getting a bit of a reputation after doing this piece in particular. Um, and he interviews them and he says to both of them, you know what, Liviens and Rembrandt, you two should go to Italy and do a grand tour like everybody else. And then your art will really get better. And Rembrandt is recorded to have said, I'm not going to Italy. I don't need to go to Italy. Enough people here have gone to Italy and their art isn't any better than anyone else's.
Oh, smack.
And he says, it doesn't make you a great artist to go to Italy. And I've seen enough pieces that come through here. And the man left and he recorded in a letter to someone else. He said, Liviens is good. He's technically a better artist than Rembrandt is, but Rembrandt will be the greatest art, will be the greater of the two, and maybe the greatest artist of the age because of all the artists I've met, he works the most from imagination.
Rembrandt does.
Rembrandt does.
Yeah, so that's interesting because I think that's the reason for this. That it looks so weird. I think he's at that young age, he's already making stuff up.
Well, and you also have to remember that there is a print revolution going on in Europe too. The printing press has been around for a little over 100 years, no,
Mm-hmm.
200 years. But really, even though it's only been like 200 something years, it's in the last part of the 50 years before he's born and during his lifetime that there's a revolution in woodcutting and copperplate etching, and there's a lot of graphic art. We'll talk a little bit more about his graphic art,
Hmm.
um, and that's part of what the video is about because it really influences his painting too. But let's talk about this painting for a second. I hate to do this, but I think it is the way we know for a fact that one of the ways, even from a young age, he built his paintings up is he would work from the back to the front. And he did the same thing with his etching. So he would paint in a background, then the middle ground, and then the foreground. That may not sound like a crazy thing, but he also was working, he didn't work from a lot of drawings. He did drawings, he did a lot of drawings. He
Hmm.
just didn't do a lot of drawing studies for his paintings. He tended to work directly on the canvas. So you can even see how this is kind of built up, right? He's got the background, he's got this middle ground, and then he's got the foreground. And it is interesting and very Rembrandt-esque compared to a Rubens, which Rubens wouldn't have done this as much as he did. He's got a super bright middle ground and a very dark foreground. Like that is
Hmm.
a Rembrandt choice, if there ever was one, of having these figures that are supposedly in front of the bright figures, but they're almost entirely in darkness.
He must have planned somewhat for this painting because
I'm sure that
these dark pigments would have been transparent, and over time you'd see this figure through it.
possibly, yeah,
Yeah, I wonder.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
And a lot of the things I'm saying are general about him. He did modify his methods for, different works, but usually he worked from back to front, painted right on the canvas, didn't do a lot of he didn't work it all up as a drawing beforehand. You know, as he got famous, well, first before we do that, let's go to a rudimentary etching from the same time. There's an
Okay.
etching that he did that shows how and it's a multi-figural etching. I think that's it. Nope, that's Adam and Eve.
What's the
Keep going.
subject? Is it this one?
Nope,
Nope,
go to the
that's
right
Adam
of
and Eve.
that. Nope, yeah, keep going until you find an etching that's a multi-figural work. Nope, that's a
Well, there's the
drawing.
crucifixion over here.
Not that one. Not that one.
That looks like an
Remember where
engraving.
that one is. Remember where that one is.
Okay.
Okay, that one. So that first
Yeah.
painting that I showed you,
Yeah.
that was done about the same time this etching was done, which
This
also
this one
shows,
here, this really.
yeah, these were done about the same time. And it just shows you um how I like to hear and I like to show in these podcasts that an
Hmm.
artist didn't start as a genius. Right? They started here he is like as a 18-year-old on about both of these. And then that Saint Stephen being stoned, the multifigural that's only a year later, is about the same time as the other etching I showed you. That I said, remember where that is? It's the one on the far right at the bottom of your screen.
Yeah, yeah, this one here.
That one is about the same time as the Saint Stephen multifigure that's only a year or two later. So
Jeez Louise.
he's really improved and become ambitious by within a year or two of leaving Lastman's studio. He's working both in oil and in etchings because you
So
can make
these are definitely etchings. They're not dry point.
they're definitely etchings.
They
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
God, his etchings. Did you see his show at the LDS Church Museum like 15 years ago when it came?
Yes, I did.
And oh my gosh, I don't know. I don't understand. His etchings are beyond beautiful. There's something about them.
Okay, bring up the video. Let's talk about this
Okay.
video.
Okay.
This will show you his methods.
All right, here it is.
Okay. So this video is on YouTube for anybody who wants it. You may want to move your mouse so that
Oh
figure
yeah, I always do that.
so he gets a copper plate and they so those who are listening, they melt a hard ground onto the surface. Sometimes it's clay, sometimes it's a wax. And once that's melted on and they've created an even surface, they place it over a candle to smoke it. This is called candle black. And it's one way to get a dark pigment at the time. Blacks are really hard to get before the 19th century. So now that it's black from both the ground that's kind of a wax and the candle black, then it cools down and it's kind of this kind of gray surface. And then they get a etching needle or a burn and they go over it and he draws, doesn't scrape into the metal. He's just maybe it's a little bit of scraping, but it's mostly scraping away the black, right?
Mhm.
Then they put that plate into ferric chloride acid. And that etches all of the areas that aren't black, all of the areas that were exposed by that pen. Then they clean off everything, right? And now, so that's why they call it etched. It's etched by the acid.
Mhm.
Then you go back over it with a metal, thicker line, and you can deepen it at this point.
Hmm.
That's how you get different layers of ink, right? You get one that's like just the surface level that the ferric acid ate into the place you exposed, and then another one is
Oh.
you cut more into the metal with
Oh wait, just to be clear. So what they did was they they carved into the ground, etched it, pulled it out, drew some more, etched it again so that the former sketch gets etched even deeper and the new sketch gets etched shallower.
almost. Let me say this again. So what they did is he gets the ground of that lamp black that comes from the candle
Mm-hmm.
and the clay, and he doesn't really scrape into the metal at that point. He
Right.
just exposes the metal through that ground, sticks it in the acid, and the acid eats anywhere where the ground isn't, anywhere he's exposed. Then he gets then he gets again his burin, they call it, or metal etching pen, and cuts into the metal.
Oh, he did?
And that cutting into the metal is not the acid. He's making deeper lines than the acid makes
So he's
at that
that's the
point.
dry point that I was asking about.
That's the dry point.
Okay.
So he's now got two different kinds of way that the metal's been cut into, one chemically and one with the dry point. And that
Hmm.
creates different levels of depth. Then he cleans off, then they clean off everything, right? So now he's got the plate is cleaned off. And what he's left with is a surface that's been chemically and physically etched.
Hmm.
Now they soak the water with paper, the paper with water that they're going to print onto. They soften it, and then they mix whatever ink they're going to use with linseed oil. So basically, like a kind of, oil-based ink. And he mixes it to the thickness he wants. He would have mixed his own ink, but it's really only one color. But sometimes there's a little variation in the color. I mean, sometimes there's, you know, it's a little more reddish or a little more bluish. And then they push that ink into the plate.
Hmm.
Once it's been pushed into the plate, and they make sure every line is filled in, then they clean off the plate. This is them just pushing all the ink into every line.
Oh,
Now they clear off all of the excess ink that's not in the lines.
I did etching in college. This is the part I hated so much.
I'm sure it's a filthy business,
Oh my
right?
gosh.
So
And you
it's
go
really
home with the
dumb.
driest hands. You're just like your hands just are cut and cracked and
So now everything the lines are all filled with ink, but the surrounding areas are not.
yeah.
Now the plate is put down on a piece of cloth. All the ink lines are filled. Paper is removed from the water. It's still going to be moist, but they're putting it between layers of cloth to make sure that it's not, wet,
Dripping wet. Yeah.
dripping. They put that over the paper, and then they put layers of cloth over that paper, and um, they push that through the press. So here we're about to see the press process where the plate with the paper on top of it in between layers of cloth goes through the press, and the press forces the paper into the grooves where the ink is.
Hmm.
So the benefit of this is that as an artist, you can make as many as 10,000 impressions from one copper plate before the ink degrades the
10,000? Are you
as many
serious?
as 10,000. Yeah. And so there are a lot of Rembrandts floating around that go from, they're still inking until the early 20th century, some of his copper plates, but you can tell the difference as an expert. And see, it's a reverse of the image.
Mm-hmm.
You have to remember it's always going to be a reverse that shows up on the paper.
Hmm.
Um, so thank you to Laura White, the printmaker, who made this video and posted it on YouTube.
Yeah, that was pretty
But it
cool.
gives you an idea of here's a guy who he's making money simultaneously doing he becomes very quickly a portraitist. And he becomes very quick and he also is making money from prints. And the prints are something that he can trust to printmakers once he's made it or his assistants. And Rembrandt does have assistants. He has as many as 50 assistants throughout his entire career. Um, and um, and he has a group of students who live with him. You would love this. Um, you would totally love this, Jeff. So he, if you go to study with Rembrandt, um, you pay to learn from him, and you're not working on a lot of his paintings except for his big ones. Occasionally, you're helping because he's mostly doing his works 100% on his own, except for the really big ones, which is unusual because a lot of people have assistants who do most of the painting and then you come in at the end. He's
Mm-hmm.
doing everything from soup to nuts himself pretty much, except for on the big ones. But He he's collecting paintings from Italy that are coming in on ships. Sometimes the paintings are meant to go to Van Dyck in England where he's living, and Rembrandt learns about them and offers to pay the people more money than Van Dyck was paying, and steals them from Van Dyck,
Oh,
and
harsh.
and then gets them into his house. And then he has his assistants copying Raphael's and Rubens, and they're all doing their copies. And then after they've done that, it's a 5-year study course to study with Rubens. 3 years is old master
Rubens
copy.
or Rembrandt?
Sorry, Rembrandt.
Okay.
5 years to be one of in his school, and it's 3 years old master copies, 2 years nudes. And he also, on a weekly basis, would get out his costume closet, and he'd say to all his assistants, "Okay, guys, pick any costume you want, and we're going to make up a story. And you're all going to dress, and half of you are going to dress up as models for our made up story, and the other half of you are going to paint
Interesting.
the story we just made up." And so all the students would have to take turns being models and coming up, and he would sometimes dictate the ridiculous stories that they had, and they would come up with them themselves. But the whole exercise was, you had to do multi-figural work, and you had to know your old masters, and you had to know your the human figure. And if you look at some of the nude figures that he did, um he was not interested in Italian
Mm-mm.
um idealized figures. He was interested, let's go to that Adam and Eve. That Adam and Eve is just like it's a trip. And that is a
Mm.
trippy image for, if you're used to an Italian idealized classical image. I mean, these look like people that walked off the street in the Netherlands. I mean, they're not fat, but they look like normal people. You know, she's got she's got a pear-shaped body. So does he. You know, they're not idealized. Look at the old man drawing that I showed you a moment ago.
The old man drawing?
Oh, is that it? Yeah, look at that. So this man is dressed up in a costume. He is not posing these people in any um recognized classically defined way. He's not trying to mimic an Italian classicized Renaissance world, which is what makes him exciting at first. And it's one of the reasons he get us all the business he does, is because he gets a reputation for realism, what we call realism today, verisimilitude, making people exactly who they are. And he's also doing it in interesting ways. So go to a self-portrait that he does in his early 20s that's at the bottom left. Right? It's dark right there.
Hmm.
Early 20s. I want you to zoom in on that hair on the left.
He's
Zoom
using
in
the
even
back of his
closer.
brush.
He's using the back of his brush. He's
Yeah.
just turning it around, and he's we would say incising the paint, but he's putting on thick layers of paint, and he's just using the back of his brush to get those textures.
Hmm.
No one's teaching him that. He's not looking at any, I mean, people keep saying he's looking at Titian, he's looking at so and so. But I mean, this is a pretty bewildering mix, even in his early 20s, of, I mean, dude, how do you even describe his choice to do a portrait where most of the face is in the dark?
I know, it's a very strange decision. I
And
mean,
and like, and it
the
also draws you directly to his eyes for his, in an interesting way, doesn't it? Because you want to know what's going
yeah,
on
it's
there.
like it teases you to look into it. You just Yeah, that's a really interesting choice. It's hard to paint in the shadows like this. So, and
The
he did a really nice job. Man, do I have good news for all of you guys. We are now being sponsored by Windsor Newton. That's right, Windsor Newton, the Windsor Newton. You're probably asking yourselves, how is this good for us? I'll tell you why it's good for you, because you freaking love this podcast. And if it's good for me as the host, it's good for you because I can keep bringing you more and more episodes with their generous funding. So you're welcome from them and from me. So if you haven't heard of Windsor Newton, you're kind of living under a rock because they've been around forever. Let me show you something. You see these two old farts right here? They founded Windsor Newton back in 1832. That's like 50 years younger than the United States of America. Now, I realize for all of you Asians and Europeans and Africans and so on, that's nothing to you guys. But to us, that's freaking old. That's a long time, almost 200 years. Now, if a company that sells art supplies has been doing it for almost 200 years, you'd think they know what they're doing, and they do. And I know they do because my entire studio is full of Windsor Newton art supplies, from ink to papers to charcoal to pencils to mediums, everything. And recently, one of my guests highly recommended their watercolors, and I'm hoping to start watercolors soon. And of course, I'm going to go to them. And you should go to them too, because they're offering a 10% discount code, Undraped Artist Pod. Undraped Artist Pod. You type that in, you'll get 10% off anything you order off their website, windsornewton.com. Send them a message that you love this podcast and that we're worth investing in by using this discount code and ordering with it. Undraped Artist Pod at windsornewton.com. Go buy some art supplies. Discount code only good for 30 days from the time of this ad.
So he does this when he's a very young man, and he makes his bread and butter doing portraits. This is a pretty extreme version of a portrait for him. But, let's go to one of his multifigural religious pieces. He gets a commission to do The Passion of the Christ, a series of 7 paintings for the Duke of Orange. I think we've got the Raising of Lazarus. But
all right, let me comment on this real quick.
Maybe you want to talk more about this before we go.
Well, yeah, I'm just trying to figure out. I think we've talked about this before, but when I took my 3-year sabbatical and stopped selling paintings to learn how to paint, this is the guy I studied. I go back and forth to California because that's the closest Rembrandts to Utah. And I'd go back, I'd study them, try and figure out what he was doing. Then I'd come back home and I'd paint for a year or two. And then I'd go back and then check them out again and, take notes, figure out what I was doing wrong, what I was doing right. I mean, I wasn't trying to mimic him exactly, but I was trying to just understand what made him so great, And I still am there because it's a mystery when you paint in this many layers. I don't think it's possible to know exactly how it's done. But one thing I noticed on this is that there must have been a red underground on the painting.
You can kind of see it, and you can also see kind of like an ochre so there's like who knows what the red is, and there's also kind of like a
so he's clearly tinting the canvas.
He's almost going all the way down to the canvas, isn't he?
Or the dark paint on the hair and face is the tint of the canvas. So that might be wet into wet here. God, that's the thing. That's the mystery. It's so hard to tell. Because if you paint this all dark and it's sort of an umber tone and then you scrape it, you're not going to get down to white canvas. It's going to be dirty from the paint. But anyway, I'm just geeking out over it. I don't know that I have anything to add really. But what did you want me to pull up?
Let's pull up do I have the Raising of Lazarus in here?
Let's see.
I think it's one more over from that, to the right of that.
Oh yeah.
So this is kind of
Is this a small piece?
No, it's 92 centimeters high. So what is that? It's roughly about 40 inches high. So it's not huge. And he does this about 10 years after. He's about 30 when he does it. Well, no. Let's see. He's born when? Let's get his date again.
1606.
1606. He does this in 1630, about.
Okay.
He's 24 years old when he does this painting. And he does this as part of a series for the Duke of Orange, 7 religious multifigural scenes. And this is there's a lot said about how he was obsessed with two things. This is the experts talking. Two terms: chiaroscuro and sfumato. Chiaroscuro refers to chiaro meaning light, scuro meaning darkness, and this was an Italian idea that I don't know if it was coined by Da Vinci, but it was something that Da Vinci talked a lot about. Of one of the ways you create drama and composition in a painting is by having extreme darks and extreme lights. And in the Baroque era, this was, and we think of Caravaggio, he did this: extreme darks and extreme lights. And then sfumato is Italian for smokiness. And that was making sure that your brushstrokes weren't so much straight lines, but they were kind of dispersed and the edges were blurry
Hmm.
for the work that you were doing, right? So those are two terms that are often applied to Rembrandt's as a lesson that he learned. You can certainly see the chiaroscuro here, that he's drawing our attention in interesting ways about the painting. Christ is not the brightest figure. It's actually the reaction of the people who are looking at Lazarus coming out of the grave. And the highlight on the back of that figure, who's probably supposed to be a Joseph of Arimathea kind of figure.
Mm-hmm.
That is the brightest moments, is the people reacting to the miracle, not the miracle itself or Christ who's performing the miracle that get the greatest attention. But it is overall a pretty dark painting. And that's something that is against the taste of the time, because and this is what becomes known as kind of the Rembrandt style in Holland and Amsterdam that make him particularly famous, is that he does moody, dark paintings that bring to life these biblical scenes in a way that people aren't used to seeing them. They're normal people in them, not idealized people. And there's high drama from this light and dark contrast. They're also not huge. They're not huge
Mm-hmm.
scenes. Um,
It's interesting how unfinished the bottom is.
isn't it? Isn't it fascinating how I mean, it's almost like you can just,
It's just a
he's just
wash.
done a wash over that ground and that's it.
Have you ever heard the term tenebrism?
Yeah,
Okay. So that's one thing I associate with Rembrandt, which is related to chiaroscuro,
it is.
except
Yeah.
the way I think of tenebrism, and maybe I'm wrong, but is a little bit different than chiaroscuro. Chiaroscuro is, to me, is just using high contrast, which you can
Yeah.
basically create just by using a bright light source. But tenebrism, as far as I understand it, is where you manipulate the light in such a way that's almost unnatural, but still somehow reads.
I
Where
think that is an accurate way of talking. Tenebrism is a term that comes out of this period, and I think it's first applied to Caravaggio, and it is what you're talking about. It's almost a supernatural use of light.
right, like with this woman
Right?
here, there's no explanation for that bright of light on her face.
No.
You can't create that with candlelight. You can't create that. I mean, short of modern lighting, it's not possible. So he would have
There-
he would have basically exaggerated the light dramatically in order to move your eye to where he wanted it to be in order to compose the painting more dramatically.
there's this great quote. There's a letter that Rembrandt writes where he talks about his style of painting to one of his patrons, and he says in it, and it's one of the only documents we have of him talking directly about his style. And he says, I've tried to paint the world as it is, and I've tried to paint the way that other artists paint, and I've tried again and again and again to my great frustration, and I can only paint the world as I imagine it.
Hmm.
So, in other words, it's pretty clear that he's working using real people and actual people, but these effects that you're talking about, and tenebrism is a great term to use with it. He may be using real people and real costumes that he's got, and he may be doing a lot of playmaking with his assistants to come up with dramatic gestures and things like that that are observed in real life. But these light effects and these colors and these darkness effects are clearly applied
Mm-hmm.
from the imagination to some extent, right? They're not observable effects. He's he's heightening reality as he's doing it. And I think it is one of the things that makes it impossible to for it is what distinguishes him from other artists of the time, because he's not setting up a room with light effects and saying, okay, everybody, here's how I set up my lights and here's the kind of candles I'm using or this or that. He's kind of like probably setting up people and then sitting down and just, by the way, there's a painting of him about this point of him in his studio. Go to that image. It's a fascinating painting. I think it's really kind of like a painting. It's a philosophical statement. It's all the way to your right, to the right of the screen. Keep going to the left. I mean, now go to
Oh,
the
to the
left.
left.
Yeah, go. No, no, it was all the way to the right, but it's on the right side. Keep going like three over from there. One more.
Oh, this one. Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
This is one of the most famous
it is.
Rembrandts out there.
It's one of the most famous, and it's him in his studio, almost as if he's um I think, yeah, art historians read this in a lot of ways of like the artist is so much smaller than the canvas in this painting because he's intimidated by what's in front of him.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are all kinds of ways to psychoanalyze these things,
Yeah.
right? I look at it and I think he's obviously dressed himself up in a grand manner.
I was going to ask you about that. Is that
Right?
not common clothing of his time?
I think he's showing off in that he's dressed very well, like an upper class guy, right? And
Because I
he's not.
wonder, there are artists today that their image is a big part, or the way they dress is a big
Yeah,
part of
there's
their
something.
image. And I often wonder in artists of the past if there was a similar thing going on like with some of them.
I'm sure there was, and I'm sure that this is theater. This is theater for him, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this is his, this is studio, and he's depicted himself alone with the canvas, and that's part of the statement he's making here. I think, if I have to do my own psychoanalyzing, that I don't think is much psychoanalyzing, is he's showing that that he's unique and kind of a lone genius. He's not working in here from with 30 people around him and got a bunch of drawings on the wall. He's going directly into this canvas on his own.
Mm-hmm.
This is Indiana Jones about to paint. You know, that's it's when you get a Rembrandt painting, this is what you get. His genius making a work, and you're not getting his assistants, you're not getting everybody else.
Yeah. So me as a builder, I'm kind of curious about the substrate. Did he paint a lot on wood panel?
So this is what artists would do. We've got other examples from this period is they had a big wood panel if they were painting on canvas, and they would tack the canvas
Oh.
onto the panel. So that's one way. That's how he did his bigger canvases. He worked a lot on mahogany panels. This is something I learned in the process of doing research. You would think, oh, mahogany panels, super expensive. Mahogany panels, have you ever heard of what a sugar loaf is? A
No.
sugar a sugar loaf in the 17th century, even up until the late 19th century, was like a cone of sugar. That's how it was sold.
Mm-hmm.
And they called them sugar loaves, and they were processed at the sugar plantations that way. You'd go to the store and get a paper wrap sugar loaf and scrape off the sugar
Just
you
kind of
need
like
for
a
the
salt
dough.
lick.
Yeah, kind of like that. And it was
Yeah.
of sugar,
Okay.
and but they were called sugar loaves instead of bread loaves. The way sugar loaves were transported from the Americas to the New World were in mahogany boxes, because they were it was a very hard wood that was large. They largely kept the humidity stable of sugar
Hmm.
as they were transported across the ocean. And as an artist, you could go buy old sugar loaf panels that were mahogany, like old sugar loaf boxes.
No kidding.
And he painted a lot of mahogany. So when he was doing a big canvas, it was on canvas and it was tacked to a solid board. And then when he was done, it would be stretched onto onto sports, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when it was a small piece, it was usually on mahogany, and that mahogany was, old crates.
You know what
But they
that
were,
reminds me of?
what's
It's
that?
the price of wood. This is totally a tangent, but the price of wood is so relevant to how accessible it is. But
Yeah.
my brother he went down to Costa Rica, and he likes to work with wood as well. And he goes into this old woodworker's shop. And in Costa Rica, these are just rundown sheds with really rudimentary tools.
Hmm.
And this guy is using something like, I don't remember what it was. I'm not that good at placing the regions of wood species, but it was something like cocobolo, like this incredibly expensive exotic wood. The guy was using it to crate up things because it's everywhere
Crazy.
there.
Because it was just
It's
everywhere.
everywhere.
Well, and in the 19th century, in the turn of the century, we joke that it's cigar box tops that are what all the impressionists are painting on,
Hmm.
because you buy cigars and then you've got this kind of like cardboard surface that's really stable, and
Mm-hmm.
everything's painted on that. I mean, Sorolla drew on a lot of and painted, and so did Monet and a lot of these artists. They were painting on cigar box tops because it was what was available and it was a stable surface.
Hmm.
Before we move on from this painting, let's just back up for a second here and talk about something. There's not a lot of color in this. It's
No.
and it's not expensive paint. Vermeer is using, and so is Rembrandt, and so is Van Dyke at this time. They're using very expensive lapis lazulis. They're using vermilions that they're getting that are coming from, just really they're using expensive stuff. He's using ochres. There's not even a lot of lead white in this thing. I mean, there's some,
You could do this whole painting with black, yellow ochre, and some warm earth tone, you know.
and he's getting in this part of his career. This is what is becoming in the minds of the Dutch the anti-Italian Renaissance,
Hmm.
because the Italian Renaissance is all about um, pomp and ceremony and expensive paintings and idealized beautiful people and things, and architecture that is monumental with columns that are carved and expensive furniture in the paintings. And Rembrandt shows a humble people, humble interiors that are the ethic of the Protestant working class,
Hmm.
right? This is a
So is he a
state.
naturalist before naturalism?
I mean, I think you could say that. For people who are listening, these are hotly debated terms of naturalism and realism and classicism. I think that naturalism is the idea of you don't gild the lily, right? You don't heighten what you're seeing. I think that there's obviously some manipulation here. I mean, look, he's even like, it's interesting how his right hand is in higher contrast than his left hand, and his face almost looks like a mask. There's almost no, I mean, so he's not really,
Wait a
you could maybe
minute.
say,
Oh no. Wait, would he be left-handed? Is he looking in the mirror?
I don't know. I don't know. It's a good question.
Do we know if he's left or right-handed?
We don't know. I don't know. Maybe somebody does. I don't know. I personally don't.
Huh.
Did you hear that? Did you catch that?
That you personally don't know?
Yeah, because it just my video paused for a second.
Yeah, yeah, no, I got
Um,
that.
so I don't know, but I think that one of the things we should take away from this painting is, A, it's interesting to see his working methods and the statement of him alone working on the piece. B, that the materials and methods he's using are anti-Italian Renaissance and they're very restrained in palette. Three, the way he's depicting himself is simultaneously as kind of a theatrical, like grand person, but painted in a naturalist way. It's not like he's, there's a kind of naturalism to it. And also I would add to this, D, the composition of this is pretty remarkably complicated. This is not a very simple, if you were to lay this
Why do you
out.
say that?
Oh, I just think it's interesting that okay, so you've got the middle of the canvas is and the right hand side are dark, very dark.
Yeah.
And they're physically taking up two-thirds of the painting almost. I mean, that's an interesting compositional choice that he's got this kind of triangle in the middle that's an isosceles facing us directly, also
Mm-hmm.
one on an angle, a diagonal that's going from the far left of the screen to almost the middle. I mean, there's like a golden ratio of where that door is, that door frame, to the canvas,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you've got him in a very specific place. All the shadows are going. I mean, it's a very if you squint your eyes,
Well, that's why I'm
there's a
trying to
lot
get it further away to
there's
see
a
it.
lot of there's a lot of lines and complicated compositional diagonals that are going on in it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's not a lot. There aren't a lot of figures in it. There isn't a lot of color, but you know, the it's compositionally, I think it's kind of a complicated
Yeah, no, I get that.
set of decisions that he's made. And they're interesting. But there's also not like technically some of the thickest paint is in that floor
I know it's
on
so
the edge
cool
of the
right here.
wall. The some of the thinnest is him and the canvas.
Well,
It's
that
just
makes
like,
sense because you want the thick paint in your lights.
yeah.
You don't want to put thick paint in your halftones or darks.
Zero into where the plaster's falling off the wall underneath the yeah, right there
Isn't
where your
that
hand.
sick?
It's so like
It's just like swirly paint.
it's so satisfying and it's such like thick paint that he's just totally laid on.
But then look at these just two strokes for these pegs. Boom,
Yeah, and
boom.
they've thinned out to the point that you can almost see through them over time, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's crazy.
Huh.
And so I mean, deceptively complicated.
Yeah.
The composition, and deliberately simple the palette, which gives its own challenges.
Hmm.
Now go to Samson being in the cave.
Okay, but before we quit, I feel like you and I need to definitively decide that he's left-handed
Okay, hold on. I'm going to look this up.
because
I'm going to look this up.
if it hasn't been decided, you need to own this. It'll make you famous.
Oh, I will not be the one who determines this. I'm sure people have written.
Because if he's looking in the mirror,
so yeah.
that's his left
So
hand.
according to multiple, and this is just a very cursory search, Rembrandt was left-handed.
Bam!
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So what? So that's his left hand because he's looking in
Because
the
he's
mirror.
looking in the
Is that what
mirror.
you're saying?
Yeah, that would be his left.
And so he's holding his maul stick in his right,
Yeah.
and he's holding it with his pinky there as he's standing back from something.
Well, he's got his brushes in his hands. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
Okay.
So they already knew. Dang it, we didn't discover anything.
I doubt we're going to discover anything about Rembrandt. There's so much
I'm
written about him.
way too optimistic.
So let's go to one multi-figural piece, one more multi-figural piece, and then let's talk about some portraits.
What do you think?
He's getting
Should we get this one or this one?
it doesn't matter. I mean,
Let's do
I
this
think
one.
that
This one's cooler.
so this one is The Blinding of Samson. It's a very famous piece. And this is what people would call his Italianate period, where he's more interested in looking at Titian, Raphael, and the way that they use color and composition, these kinds of dramatic hand gestures that are going on. But he's still, you know what? Now that I want you to put this side by side with his most famous painting, which is the Night Watch.
All right, let's see if I can find right here.
I think that's it. Okay.
Oh, the difference is dramatic.
So one is him arguably looking more at Italian, and he's younger, and the other one is him as a mature artist. Let's see how old he was when he did the Night Watch. He did the Night Watch in 1642. So he was 36 years old. It is 14 and a half feet wide, about 10 and a half feet tall. And he was commissioned to do this by the night guards, who are they were kind of a militia whose job it was to guard the palace of, and they knew that there was a royal visit that was coming from the Medicis, and they think that that's when this was commissioned. This is the most he was ever paid for a painting. He was paid a fortune to do it.
Mm.
We know he works with assistants to make it happen, and there are all kinds of fun moments. But if we were to talk about, on the left, his Italianate period, where he's, color, drama, and kind of a kind of fanciful, cartoonish, Rubenesque way of doing things.
Mm-hmm.
Because Rubens was always like bending the truth, but in brilliant ways to create drama.
This episode is brought to you in part by Rosemary Brushes. If you're one of my listeners who's a professional artist, you're already using Rosemary brushes. But for the rest of you, come on. Take your work a little more seriously. Stop buying the other brands. It's just not worth it. Every now and then you may get lucky and buy a good brush from another brand, but use the brand that professionals like myself are using. Go to rosemaryandco.com, link in the description or the show notes, and get yourself some quality brushes before your next painting.
Rubens would have really understood, I mean, the one on the left is very much kind of that Italian plus Rubens way of looking at things where, you know, who knows if Samson's leg really would have, his right leg would have been up in the air while his left leg was down. But it really does, help as with the composition to draw you into different moments. But the one on the right is, it's like portraits of 20 something people in real space, but dramatized through this Rembrandt um, use of tenebrism,
Mm-hmm.
of
Yeah, right here,
extreme
especially.
dark and light, right? But it's also not very realistic because why would she be in the light in the
Exactly.
middle, right?
Exactly. But
It's
somehow
not,
we believe it.
yeah, and we don't really care because
No.
it's it's and they're all portraits. They paid for this to be a portrait, and it
So
was
these
in
are
the
real
hall.
characters.
Real people, they're real people in these scenes, and they're real costumes in a real physical space. You would have walked in there, and that background, which we can barely see because of how dark he painted it, it's in great condition. Um, and it is you would have felt like you were standing in a room that was continued through the painting.
Hmm.
You would have felt like it was an architectural continuation of space.
Right.
Um, and it really is Rembrandt at the height of his career. This is where we're going to take a turn, Jeff, because um, it's not long after this that his wife dies, his children, except for one, have all died, and he and the fashion changes. They start looking more and more towards the French. The French are creating colorful paintings, which are much more like what the Italians are doing. And Rembrandt is also getting a bad reputation for the two women that he's been living with, that
Mm-hmm.
he doesn't marry because he's going to lose his source of income from his wife's family if he marries any of them. So it becomes more and more difficult for him to get commissions from big names.
Hmm.
Starts painting less, his health goes south, and he starts painting more and more in small scale, more experimentally. Go to the double wedding portrait. That's the women. It's a portrait of a man, not this one, man and a wife. Um,
Is
and
it a painting or?
It's a painting. It's an oil painting.
Okay.
Maybe I didn't include it.
I don't see it.
Are there any? Okay, then just go to one of the standalone portraits that are like that one.
Okay.
This is what he starts doing during the last part of his career. And this is the Rembrandt that I think we almost universally remember as this is the stuff that we admire. This is him. I love this one on the right. This is him almost at the height of his bankruptcy on the right hand side, that painting.
Oh, that's sad.
But it's also a defiant image because it's him dressed as a lord, turning his maul stick into a scepter. And there's a kind of confidence too in what he's painting here, right? I
Hmm.
mean, I mean, go. This is a very high resolution image. I want you to go to his hands. I want you to go to his face. Let's forget the one on the left for a minute. Let's just go to this one.
Do you
I
have any
mean,
of his early portraits when he was more refined? Okay.
so these are painted about 10 years apart, if I'm right. And one was done when he was 36 and one was done when he was about 46. So the one in the left is what made him famous, that
Huh.
kind of work. That's the kind of thing he was hired to do portraits for at the height of his career. And it's very typical of the technique. If you zero in on the face, you'll see that there's a tightness of brushwork. and there's a real but there's also it's not idealized, but there
No.
is a softness to the brushwork, right? A real softness.
Yeah, it's refined. It's very refined. Clean,
Very refined.
clean edges. And this is probably the thing about digital photography is all this sort of blotchiness down here probably doesn't exist in the real painting. Digital photography tends to
No,
exaggerate that.
it does, yeah.
So it's probably much smoother transitions down here.
Well, and I think this is something he really understood, is he understood that if you layered oils, you could mimic the way skin is
Yeah, that's what
translucent.
I love about them.
And you don't get that with digital photography. You get it's flattened all of
Mm-hmm.
that look. And so that's one of the things that transfixes us about him, is that he you get a sense of you're looking at a real face because he's layered skin almost
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
dermis is layered, right? He's got like reds and then kind of ochre,
Whoops.
bluish, like greenish ochres. And but we're looking at two. He becomes, with his bankruptcy and the lack of success, as the shift changes in towards a very refined, very colorful French art, which is looking at the Renaissance again.
Mm-hmm.
People start criticizing Rembrandt for being too clumsy, um, too rough, too earthy and base, and they're not interested. These are things that critics are talking about at the time, that he's fallen out of fashion, and he's he's an oaf, and he's unrefined, and we're not interested in the ugliness of Rembrandt anymore. We want the beauty of the French work.
Mm.
I think that over time, the problem with this is that he was both, right? He had, in his mid and early career, he was doing more refined work. And I don't know if it's a choice. This is the debatable question. As you get older, some artists lose their rods and cones and they lose the ability to see color and they become more interested in texture. That's a proven fact.
Oh,
It
dude.
happened. It happened to Titian.
Yeah.
Why did you say, "Oh, dude"?
Because so I've had this debate online. Well, I mean, not. I never am very persistent in these online debates because, frankly, no one knows. So it's what's the point in arguing? But I'll tell you what. In my old age, at 50 years old, I just recently realized I needed glasses. Maybe about 5 years ago, my son got glasses. I tried them on. I looked at my paintings for the first time in glasses. Turns out I've always needed glasses, I bet. And they were so much more raw and rough than I had realized.
Interesting.
And so now when I paint with my glasses, I'm able to clean up a lot of that rawness that I didn't like. Some of it I like, but some of it I don't like. And I mean, I was shocked to see my own paintings with glasses, and not
Interesting.
in a good way, not in a good way. And I made the
Well,
argument that at one point to an artist that it's very possible that with his degrading eyesight, that he can't even see the difference between the first portrait and the second.
so that is possible, and I don't think it could be an oversimplification of what's going on, but I don't think it's wrong. Because we know that with some people, it's not true with everybody, your rods and cones in your eyes start to deteriorate as you get older and you don't see color as well. And there's also cataracts as an issue.
Mm-hmm.
For some people, the world looks yellower and and just less bright, but you can still see texture.
Well, to
And
a point, but see, it's
so
this kind of stuff. Like if you look at this hand,
mhm.
if you have blurry vision, that all of a sudden looks refined. I mean, if you squint down at it, it just all those rough, patchy values sort of just blend together.
There is some of that is probably true, but we also know that near the end of his life, he's dipping rags in paint and he's pushing them into the canvas to get a
Yeah,
certain texture.
yeah,
And so it's
that's a good
not,
point.
so there's also, he's experimenting with different methods as he gets older. But he was always experimental. I mean, he's flipping around his brush and he's, scratching into the paint when he's young with the
Yeah,
brush. So he's always interested in texture. It may not. we may never know. There aren't the same interventions in the 17th century as there are now with spectacles. So, we know that that whatever happens near the end of his life, go into his face, man. Holy cow.
It's really cool.
It's so satisfying, isn't it, to see and you could make the argument that his eyesight's getting worse, but I also don't I think that's an oversimplification because look at how careful some of these highlights are. Look at how um some of these edges and the differentiation just in that collar, the choices that he's
That's
made.
true, but the thing is, so I'm not going to die on this hill. So just let me put that out there because I don't know. Obviously, no one can know. But from my own experience, like you get close to your painting and like this, and you're like, yeah, this looks good. But as the habit of a painter is to stand back and to see if it all comes together from a distance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when
Yeah.
your eyes start to fail, like mine were, I'd stand back and it would look amazing. And
Interesting.
because like from up close, you expect to see texture and interesting stuff, but then you stand back and it's supposed to come together. It's supposed to all sort
Mm,
of sort of unify when you step back.
yeah.
And mine was unifying, but then once I put on glasses, I realized no, I got to step back like across the freaking street to get that unity.
Oh, interesting.
And so that's what I mean. Like, so he could, with eyes like mine, for example, he could clearly make all those delicate decisions, but then
Hmm.
stand back and think he had his previous portrait to
That's
some
interesting.
degree and not,
Yeah.
or at least be satisfied the way he used to be with his previous portraiture. But again, I'm not going to die on this hill. It's just an idea. It could
Yeah.
totally be 100% deliberate. I have no idea.
So one of the
Hmm.
things that separates out Rembrandt from this time chemically in the way he's dealing with paints is that plumbiscite that he's turning his oil into more of a paste.
Yeah.
We
He's
know that
doing
now.
that in this stage in his career.
He's doing that in this stage of his career, in the later stage of his career. He's thickening the paint.
Hmm.
And this is where we should probably take a moment to just discuss why we think of Rembrandt as maybe the greatest portraitist who ever lived. This is how some people feel about him,
I
right?
do.
And what is it that makes his portraits
Well, I wouldn't say the greatest portrait artist that ever lived. I would probably give that to Sargent. But
interesting?
I would say he's the greatest painter of flesh that I'm aware of.
Why is that? Why do we think that
Well,
is?
you basically described it already. The way he layers paint, it gives it mimics the transparency of real skin. It's as though you can see the blood vessels under the layers of skin. It just has this luminosity that a direct painting, like we had talked about comparing him to Holbein at one point in one of
Yeah.
our,
Yeah.
where Holbein was a direct painter because he could draw so well and he just bam, 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 bam. Am I getting
Yeah.
the right artist?
Yeah, you are.
Yeah. Okay. And so where Rembrandt's layering and layering and layering, he's creating this translucency that is very similar to the translucency in real skin. And it's
Yeah.
just so like when I look at a Rembrandt painting, particularly his older stuff, his earlier portraits, they're so real. It's like you could pinch them and they turn pink, you know?
Yeah.
And the other
Yeah.
thing about him is he is such a master at controlling transparency to opacity. Throughout
Hmm.
history, many artists have known how that works, but no one, in my opinion, very few, I was going to say no one, but very few seem to control it the way he does and are able to maximize form the way he does. Because that's the thing about it. If you control the transparency and opacity relationship and it is completely in sync with the volume, with the relative values, then you maximize the illusion of form. And he did it so well. It was like if his paintings weren't framed, you'd think the person was standing in front of you.
So can you point out to us that opacity, transparency
Well,
in
in his later paintings, I don't see it as much though. Yeah, this is a good one. This is insane. Like, okay, here's the thing though. You can't, this is one of the frustrating things about painting in layers. I'm not comparing myself to Rembrandt, but I have tried over the years to paint with the same luminosity that he paints with. And freak, man, it does not translate in photography. So the viewers of the podcast have to see an original to appreciate it. One painting is not going to look like it pops off the canvas on your screen. It just won't. You got to stand in front of it, right? Because that transparency and opacity doesn't exist on a screen. It doesn't exist on a picture. It only exists in a
No,
painting.
because you've got light bouncing to the painting and back at you through the painting.
Well, so here's how I explain it. Here's how I explain it with my students. So when you're painting, if you're painting you're painting a dark color it's going to reflect light. But if you look into the dark, it's the absence of light. It's not a dark object. It's literally the absence of light.
Right.
So there's difference between, say, a dark shirt and a dark room. A dark room, absence of light; dark shirt, light reflecting off of a shirt with a dark pigment. Right? Okay. Now, it's when you're painting, sure, when you paint use a dark pigment to manipulate to represent the absence of light, sure, it works. But what works even better is to choose a paint that absorbs light. Because if it absorbs light and doesn't reflect as much of it back to you, it's the closest thing you'll ever get to the absence of light, because it's as though it stole the light. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. It makes sense. Yep.
By doing that, now a lot of artists do it wrong, where they make the entire thing from the Terminator edge, which is the basically the edge where the light falls off, and they do the entire thing transparent. Well, the entire thing isn't completely absent of light. There's some light in there. So what Rembrandt did so well is he made it as transparent as it is dark. In other words, if it's 20% dark, it's 20% transparent. If it's 30% dark, it's 30% transparent. And he did it so well that he maximized that illusion of form like nobody else.
That is the explanation I was looking for. That is a brilliant explanation. Zero on his face and the nose where you were going.
Yeah.
Where you were looking. Let's go in a little closer. I don't know how high resolution this image is.
Zoom in on it. I thought you said point to it. Okay.
No, zoom in on it. Go even closer if you can.
Yeah, you see now, these aren't totally transparent paints. A lot of contemporary artists or modern artists will, I guess contemporary is the right word, they'll just make this whole shadow transparent and just let the canvas show through. That's not what he did, because this isn't black. This is like 30% gray. So, or I guess it would be like 70% gray. I got it reversed. So it's 70% transparent. It's not totally transparent. It's 70% transparent. And, where it's completely dark, like in the pupil, it's 100% transparent, because it's 100% gray, totally black. And that's what he did so beautifully. And then in the lights, he would use lead white, and lead white is it's mostly opaque, but it's more translucent than other paints. And so he would, in order to get the white to be more and more and more opaque, as it got closer and closer to the highlight, he'd build up more layer, more thickness, more impasto, and he would get the lights more and more opaque by building up more impasto. So it'd create this perfect transition from transparent to opaque as he moved down the value scale. And no one does it this well.
It's interesting as I'm thinking about this, that interaction that he had, or as a young man, where they say, "Hey, you should go to Italy." And he says, "No."
Well, they weren't doing this in Italy, though. That's the thing.
They weren't doing it. They weren't doing it. No one was doing it.
No, I don't think so.
I mean, you could argue that he and Van Dyke and Velasquez, to some extent, were playing in the same sandbox of what they'd arrived at. But I don't think they were communicating with each other. I don't know how much. I'm sure that Rembrandt and Van Dyke saw others' works in person. I don't believe that Velasquez. So let's leave him out of it. That Velasquez saw either one of their works in person. There's no evidence of it. He may have seen reproductions in black and white as etchings, kind of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then he would have understood value, but he wouldn't have seen texture and actual pigment if that was used. But one of the at this point in Europe, in Northern Europe, they had oil paint about 100 years longer than they did in Italy.
Hmm.
Because in Italy they were using
Tempura,
what's the word?
egg tempura.
Tempera. They were using tempera, egg tempera, which is an entirely opaque process, right? And then he gets that they have a little longer, maybe 80 to 100 years longer. They're working with oil paints. And one of the arguments in art history is that in the 17th century, um, it takes that long for them to really figure out what they can do with oil paint. It takes them about maybe 200 years before Rembrandt, Van Dyck really understand layering.
Mm-hmm.
Because even the suggestion of look at what the Italians doing, the Italians are still using oils not entirely opaquely, but they're using them not in the same layering that Rembrandt uses them. And you could argue that one of the ways he was able to, he's looking at Titian, who's maybe the most experimental Italian with oil paints, but his is much more about texture, not about layering.
Yeah.
And you could say that Rembrandt, because he self-isolated and experimented, he's the one who is the leading edge of innovation.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if his students ever really pick up on it. I think that a lot of people have tried to paint like Rembrandt. In your opinion, has anybody painted like Rembrandt since?
Yes, the living artists. I think
Yeah,
Stephen
anybody in the
Assail.
Stephen Assail has been obsessed, especially with late Rembrandt, like that very
Well, in my
textural
opinion,
stuff,
paints
right?
more like early Rembrandt, but
You think he does?
yeah.
You know him better than I do. Stephen
I
Assail's
don't
been
know him that well personally, hardly at all, but
didn't you and I visit him together? No, I
no,
visited him
I haven't
once.
visited him in New York. He's been here. He's been to my studio,
Yeah.
but I haven't visited him. Yeah, he's the closest living artist that I know of to paint that paints like Rembrandt. I mean, he paint more like Rembrandt than anyone else I know of. The other one would be Odd Nerdrum, but I think Odd Nerdrum
Yeah.
would probably, I would think he paints more like late Rembrandt.
I mean, there were artists in the 19th century who were obsessed with him, like Delacroix was obsessed with him, Meissonier was obsessed with him. Um, I think that I know that Whistler spent a lot of time looking at Rembrandt.
I don't think he ever became
Um,
Rembrandt.
no, I don't think he did either. And I think that I don't know if he was actually trying to be like him or if he just studied him, right?
Yeah.
And absorbed some things from him and left other things. I'm trying to think of anybody in the 19th century to the 20th century. Um,
I
I
mean, there
also,
are artists that have really, that have gotten, in my opinion, have gotten really close in this ability to create volume in the way he did. Like Solomon J. Solomon or like
hmm,
Waterhouse or I don't know. That's just a couple off the top of my head.
I don't
But
think when I look at this face and I see this layering and I see that transparent versus solid um, or opaque, I, why is your yeah, what's the word I'm looking for? That technique, that way of looking at his works. I don't know of anybody who created something like this. And I think that every time I read about Rembrandt, people talk about you fall into the eyes of the person there. You feel like you're actually looking at them. You're right there with them. And it does seem interesting that the academy that existed in Italy and France that dominated the way the artists were taught from the late 1600s to the early 20th century weren't able to teach this in a mass way. That this wasn't something that that was passed down as and just folded into Western art technique.
It's not intuitive.
And I think
It's
that
yeah.
that to me, the fact that there aren't other Rembrandts. I mean, there have been people who've learned how to do geometry and great figure work and color composition, and who've been able to do. I mean, Bouguereau was brilliant at the figure. He was absolutely brilliant at the figure, right? He was unbelievable.
Yeah, the difference between Bouguereau is while his skin is incredibly beautiful and pearlescent, it to me, Rembrandt's is more naturalistic.
Is it just me or the rest of you guys also get weirdly excited when you order new paint? Because I don't know about you, but when I get paint in the mail, it feels like Santa just dropped my Christmas presents off at my doorstep. With Vasari paint, my paint of choice and the podcast sponsor, it's even more exciting. And let me show you why. Because when Vasari shows up, it comes in this incredible box where each tube lays in this little compartment perfectly formed around the tube in this nice soft foam. And it's surrounded by velvet, red velvet. Now you got to ask yourself, if a paint comes so carefully protected and surrounded by red velvet, you got to wonder if this paint is worthy of royalty. It is. Vasari is. So if you haven't tried Vasari, you're seriously missing out. And the thing about Vasari, it's not only the best paint out there, it's also made by an incredible company that's been around for 30 years and knows its customer by name. Do yourself a favor, go to vasaricolors.com and order yourself some for your next painting.
It to me too. I think that's
Yeah.
true too. And the thing is that Bouguereau's version of skin was taught to one level or another over a 200-year period in the academy.
Mhm.
You could learn to do it to varying degrees of effectiveness. This, I don't believe, was taught. I don't think this was something, and I
We
think
didn't
that the
talk about,
people-
oh yeah, we did talk about that, his teacher. So his teacher didn't paint like this.
No, his
Yeah.
teacher didn't paint like this. His teacher was much more Italianated and did not layer things like this. Was much more about gesture and not very much of a portraitist. But I guess this layering of oils, the opaque versus transparent, the idea of observation from life. What you would have learned in the academy was you would have learned anatomy, you would have learned color, you would have learned value. You would have learned like dark and light, but you wouldn't have learned what you're talking about paint application and those very complicated. And we're not talking about special ingredients here.
No.
It's not like he had like he was a cook who had special access to a cow breed that no one else had, right? Like he's making this Wagyu beef because he's got access to cows that are bred at a higher elevation and are eating more fat than anybody else, and they're not breeding with any other cow. He doesn't have a South American ingredient for paint that's only being shipped to his house from Chile in the 17th century that no one else has access to. He's actually not using materials that are that special.
Well, I
how
mean, from
he's
what you
using them.
described, they're not special at all.
They're not special at all. In fact, compared to what Vermeer and Van Dyke and Rubens are using, which is the grade A expensive stuff all the time.
Okay, but here's a thought. This just literally just came to me because as you're talking, I'm thinking, how did he discover it? There may be a couple of things that came together for Rembrandt that allowed him to fall into this. So one, we talked about in an earlier podcast where I had made the claim that Rembrandt wasn't the greatest draftsman. And I think that's when I compared him to Holbein. I said, Rembrandt, he was like, Holbein could get somebody smiling and have it done in 3 hours. And it was like spot on, perfect proportions, And then, but Rembrandt was like, he kind of labored over his portraits. It seems like there's a lot of awkwardness sometimes to his figures. And so I still stand by this, that I think that because he was such a hard worker, he must have been, he was so intelligent and yet he wasn't naturally a great draftsman. He pushed through to get it right and he could get it right. But in the meantime, he was forced to layer paints. And in that process of layering paints and fixing and fixing and fixing, it opened himself up to experimentation that he might not have taken if he was a better draftsman. That's one theory. But the one that just occurred to me is the materials actually might have been an aid to him. Because the thing about oil paint is it kind of does what I described with transparency to opacity by itself if you have the right palette. And what I mean by that is if your darks are transparent, and really if all your colors are transparent except for white, it almost happens on accident.
Which is, for people who don't know oil paint, this is very true in the 17th century. One of the real ironies is that the darker the color, the more transparent it is.
Right.
In the 17th century, they're constantly trying to find an opaque dark color.
And that's a problem.
Because the problem is that as you get a dark color, you often have to layer multiple layers of a dark oil color. And and sometimes artists, in order to get the colors to dry faster, they mix turpentine with it. And the turpentine, if they get the mix wrong, let's say that they mix more turpentine on layer 2 than they do on layer 3 or 4, then layer 2 dries faster and cracks the slow drying layer 5.
Right.
That happens later. And that's what happens to a lot of Waterhouse's paintings, by the way, and it happens to a lot of other artists' paintings. They think they discover something in the 19th or 18th century with bitumen, which is this oil that comes off the Black Sea that then is acidic and it eats up all the other colors. But you're absolutely right. They've got stable dark colors
that
in
are
the
opaque in
17th
Italy
century
and
that are transparent.
oh, who's they?
And
Who's they?
They are the Dutch do. The Dutch have
stable.
They have stable, transparent, dark colors.
Well, the palette you described to me, with the except for yellow ochre, is entirely transparent except for white. So he almost couldn't avoid but to do this. But so he might have just fallen into it.
That's interesting. It's interesting that the more options you have later on for color in the 19th century, the more it drives you away from his approach. Because with fewer colors, you're forced to do the layering he was doing to get the effects he wanted.
That's a possibility. I think that's a reasonable argument. And how much great innovation and invention comes out of completely by accident?
That's a good question. There's a great book that I just got. I didn't have a chance to read it before we did it. It's called Rembrandt at Work. It's been out for a while, but it's been recently updated. And they've got, he goes through and talks about the red count on every one of his canvases. He's breaking down every pigment of every tested piece there is and coming up with the latest data. And he's what's crazy though is that you can get all of the scientific data that you want. It probably doesn't tell you as much as watching 5 to 10 minutes of them working does, because you can tell what the raw ingredients are. You could tell me that, like, oh yeah, this chef is using lemon and he's using this species of lemon, but it's when he includes it in the food, right? It's when he adds it. Does he add it at the end? Does he add it in the first? So you can get a lot of scientific information about Rembrandt's materials, and it doesn't always tell you about method.
I'd take it one step further. My students often say to me, because they'll paint for 1, 2, even sometimes 3, or draw, from 1 to 3 years before they ever touch paint. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard my students say, geez, I've been watching you paint for 2 years, and until I started painting, it was just a mystery. I had no idea what you were doing. I had no idea why it was working. And then now that they're painting, now it's making sense. Like they even watching me for 2 solid years, until they started painting, they still didn't get it. They just thought it was magic.
We're going to talk about Eng, you and I, one of these days, because he was one of the great portraitists and painters of all time. I believe so. We'll talk about that. But he he was the absolute distillation of the French Academy. And he said, it takes 20 years to learn how to draw and 1 day to learn how to paint.
I almost
And
agree with that. So,
and that mentality is almost the anti-Rembrandt mentality. It goes to show why there weren't other Rembrandts within the Academy, because the Academy focused so much on line, on disegno, we call it in art history. They don't talk about the colore, the application of paint. And this application of paint, I mean, I don't know if anybody at the end of this discussion, I think we're going to have to do a part 2 Rembrandt at some point. I think that what I want people to walk away from, and I don't know what you want people to walk away from this discussion, is number one, I want them to know that Rembrandt grew up at a time when he had access to a lot of materials, methods, techniques. He was living in a very wealthy area, and he chose to self-isolate within that environment. He didn't do what the art of the artist did, which was go to Italy, and he didn't imitate. For the most part, he understood Italian approaches to art. He owned Italian pieces. He sometimes even had works that looked somewhat Italianate, we would call it. But in the end, his self-isolation led to a kind of alchemy. They even used the word alchemy in his day to talk about what he was doing. Alchemy, for those who don't know, was the mystical changing of any material into gold. It was taking base materials and turning them into special materials. And that is a good explanation of what he did. He did not have a real mentor who showed him how to do it. And he really, I don't think he's been repeated in the history of art. Maybe there are people who nowadays we can look 350 years later, almost 400 years later. Maybe Stephen Husserl's cracked it. Maybe you've picked some things from him and really been able to incorporate them. But as an art historian who loves the French Academy on some level, I realized that the French Academy's failure was to take people away from what Rembrandt had learned in another direction. That it took them towards drawing and towards paint that was not layered in the way that he was layering. It's almost like we lost a branch of knowledge when the Academy professionalized the Art Academy, and taught
yeah.
people how to make it. It wasn't taught anymore. It doesn't mean that it can't be taught. Maybe that's a branch of knowledge that we can start to teach people how to do now that there is an Assail, that there is a you, that there are people like that. Because I don't think it was ever incorporated into the canon.
Just
That's
my
my
feeling on that is I agree with that drawing statement that who was it that said that? I'm sorry.
Eng.
Eng.
Auguste Dominique Eng.
Eng said that.
Eng.
That's interesting. I don't think of him as a draftsman either. His stuff is sort of caricaturesque. But anyway.
We'll talk.
Yeah. Yeah.
When we look at stuff.
So anyway, I mean, I like Eng, but I totally agree with that. I just think that Rembrandt mastered painting at a level that few artists have, but he still doesn't come off to me as a great draftsman. If someone were to come along and draw like the French, the 19th century French, but paint like Rembrandt, then that would be that there would be nothing better.
To you, that's the super soldier.
That's
right there.
exactly. There's like, because Rembrandt's paintings are great despite the awkwardness in drawing, because he's so good at painting. But imagine you get someone that draws like Waterhouse, and like if Waterhouse had a little more Rembrandt,
Yeah.
like holy crap, what would that be like?
Yeah. It's I think that however, I don't know if you can, if there is ever one artist who can be that. Maybe I'm wrong.
Oh no, there's got to be.
I mean, there's I look at my heroes, who we've talked about, some of them. and you have to be careful comparing different eras because, there's 300 years separating out Rembrandt from 400 years almost us, and there's 250 years separating him and Sargent, and even though he lived at the same time as Velasquez and Caravaggio and Poussin and Rembrandt and little after Titian, and he's living there as Rubens. It's like every one of them, it's almost like, in my mind, it's like saying what's better, Mexican food or Japanese food. Well, like,
Well, that's
it's
true.
like
I agree with you
totally
100%.
different things, right? Like,
Yeah.
you can't, they're both excellent in their own way, and you can't judge them even on the same standards. But I do see what you're saying of the idea of, it is interesting to me. He wasn't, even in his time, he was criticized for not being as good of a draftsman as Jan Leviens.
Oh, he
or
was in his
as
time.
others. Yeah, that he was too rough and more working in imagination than from accuracy, and and we don't mind, and we still think of him as one of the greatest artists who ever lived. And what's crazy is that we've done that at a time when we thought there were thousands of his works, and now we know there are hundreds. So we're now living in the first era ever of humanity when there are 300 clear Rembrandts.
Mhm.
So now, are we going to have a different opinion of him once we've pushed away those lesser pieces that we thought were his that aren't his?
Hmm.
Right? Are we going to have a different opinion of Rembrandt in 100 years now that we've got the copyists out of the way? That's another question. That's another discussion for, another time. Anyway, Jeff,
Yeah.
another interesting discussion that will probably breed some controversy. And I'm going to try and head some of it off at the end of the discussion by saying I clearly don't know everything about Rembrandt.
Man, me neither.
Neither of
He's
us
a
do.
mystery.
But if anybody's been watching us for the long term, these aren't us trying to be the canonical definitive discussion of anybody. It's us trying to puzzle out and discuss and react to their work.
Mhm.
And I learned a lot today, Jeff. You're unbelievable.
Yeah, same
I
here,
love
man. Well, you finally talked about an artist that I've actually know a little bit about. I don't know a lot about a lot of artists, but
it. Oh, Jeff,
I know a little bit
where
about
they-
Rembrandt.
and I think we need to come back to Rembrandt. I think that we'll talk more. But
Yeah,
thanks
that'd
for
be
the
great.
excuse to talk about him.
Heck yeah, man. And thanks. I have to just say for the audience, I texted you yesterday and you said, I am cramming for the podcast as we speak. Dude, I know I say this every time, but dude, thanks again, man. Like, you have so much crap to do and you're sitting there at the gallery cramming for the podcast.
Thanks, man.
It's
What's
awesome,
funny
dude.
though is that I've probably read over the past 20 years maybe 10 books on Rembrandt, and I feel like, and I've seen maybe 200 of the 300 works that are definitive.
Wow. Sheesh.
And in person, and I still feel like I'm an idiot.
Yeah, well, if I read 10
Yeah.
books on Rembrandt, I wouldn't remember any of it. So
We absorb it on some level,
yeah, I
right?
don't absorb it.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks again. Great to have
You're
you.
welcome, buddy.
Take care.
Yeah, man.
Thanks for tuning in to the Undraped Artist Podcast. If you enjoyed it, subscribe. And if you could, leave a comment or review. That really helps the channel. Please share the show with your friends, and if you're feeling generous, consider a monthly donation at theundrapedartist.com. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next week.